Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for week 2 of our 4-week Start Something series on customer discovery. My name is Jean, and I'm the Programs and Event Director for the Iowa State University Papa John Center for Entrepreneurship. Our weekly Start Something webinar series is designed to support and inspire entrepreneurs at every stage of their journey. Before we dive in, a few quick housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded, and we'll send you the link tomorrow, and it'll be added to our YouTube channel. To keep the background noise to a minimum, please stay muted during the presentation, although this will be an interactive session. So when Andrew throws something out there about, hey, does anybody have this or that, feel free to unmute, even turn your camera on and participate with whatever questions you might have or to add to the content. And if you have questions, feel free to use the chat feature or ask them during the session. So in this series, we're taking a deep dive into customer discovery, a critical process for anyone looking to launch or grow a business. Customer discovery is the key to unlocking true market potential, helping to determine whether your idea is viable before investing significant time and resources. This 4-week series is designed to equip you with practical strategies that will set you up for success. For today's session, we're thrilled to welcome back Andrew Kirpalani, an experienced angel investor, co-founder and board member of Workhound, as well as an entrepreneur in residence for the ISU Startup Factory, who has extensive experience in helping startup validate ideas and scale successfully. Also helping us today is Danny O'Halloran, also an ISU Startup Factory entrepreneur in residence, co-founder of MetaFuel and business consultant. Andrew will be sharing Danny's quick video highlights, which will highlight some tools for customer discovery and prospecting. Andrew, we're excited to have you back again this week, and take a little time here to introduce yourself and kick off today's session.
Yeah, thanks, Gene. For those of you that were here last week, you already met me, but my name is Andrew Kirpalani. Most of the time, people end up calling me Kirps. You can see in the sign back there when you have a last name like Kirpalani, you kind of tend to go by nicknames. My background is in engineering, so I have a computer engineering degree from Iowa State, and then kind of just stumbled backwards into startups and got recruited out of Iowa State into the first one. Worked at 4 or 5 of them between California, Iowa, remotely for California, building an office in Iowa for a California startup, things like that. And then ultimately co-founded a startup called Workhound in 2015 with my co-founder Max Farrell. We built that up for a number of years, and then in 2022 did a private equity transaction for our Series A. And we determined at that time I was going to step back from the business, and so I sold most of my stake into that transaction, exited the business, and since then, stayed on for about a year doing transition, seeding some leaders to replace me, and then have mostly been helping other entrepreneurs since. So whether that be mentoring for the Startup Factory, as Gene said, or Techstars Anywhere, Techstars Des Moines, or Iowa when it was here, things like that, and really just kind of spending a little bit of time kind of sharing the mistakes I've made so that entrepreneurs can go make new and interesting mistakes of their own. With that, I'm going to get back into our customer discovery session. So I will share my screen here and we can kind of get into that. So just bear with me for a second as I get the sharing up and running here. We're going to share, see this and share sound. And all right, cool. All right, so if this doesn't work or if there's something that's sort of distracting from audio wise or whatever, please do put it in the chat and let me know. I'm
Looks
gonna
good.
pop that up here. Cool. All right, so what I'm going to get into this today is I'm going to start with kind of a recap of the last session, just to like kind of level set. And for those that weren't able to join us, you'll have a little brief overview of the session. You can certainly go watch it, but this will kind of help us kind of reset the foundation, and then we'll have a little bit of reference for some of the stuff that we're going to do today. So we're going to do a quick recap of mostly of kind of the high level overview of customer discovery. Why do you do it? That sort of thing. Then we'll talk about finding conversation. That'll be the video that we share from Danny. He does a really good job of showing a couple of different tools both LinkedIn and Apollo, how you can find good people or people to have conversations with. And then I'm going to go into kind of the meat of it, which is how to have those conversations, specifically how to ask questions such that you get the information you need and you don't get false signals or false positives or things like that. So that'll be the rough structure of today. So I'll kind of do the quick recap. We'll kind of rip through these pretty quickly. So what I was sort of saying about customer discovery is basically what you're doing when you're doing customer discovery is turning your assumptions, ideas, hypotheses, theories, guesses about your potential business into facts. I've just got a business model canvas here. That's the thing in the background, but you could do that with sticky notes on a board. You could do it with a old school business plan. You could do it with a business model canvas. You could do it with a mind map. It doesn't really matter. It's mostly just how do we get those assumptions down, understand which ones we need to validate, and turn them into facts. So, and why do you want to do that? Like, what's the point of customer discovery? Why do we need to do that? So, again, I kind of recapping from last time, but we talked about why do startups fail? So this is an analysis of 463 startup failures by CB Insights. Whether that's ran out of cash, no market needs, got outcompeted, or failed business model. Those are the kind of categories they used. If you look at got outcompeted, that means that you built something that was valuable and somebody else just did it a bit better than you. You got outcompeted, but you were really, screwing up the right thing. There was something real there. But if you look at the rest of these, that's 80% of the businesses, 80% of the business failures is like they were screwed up the wrong thing. You built something the market didn't need, or you ran out of cash and failed to raise capital because you didn't have something that people needed. So, customer discovery really helps you focus on those working on the right things, and like that's so important because startups are hard. Building your own business is challenging. Like if you're going to go through all that blood, sweat, and tears, like at least do the work so that you're working on the right thing. This was a story I told about Quibi of basically what happens when you don't do customer discovery. You can look at that from the last session, but a sort of upshot is some of the best people in the world, $2 billion, shut down in 2 years because they didn't go listen to their audience, right? If you don't do the customer discovery, doesn't matter how much money you have behind you, how successful you've been in the past, you're not building the right thing, you're going to fail. And the key part of that is that value is not what we say it is. You could think your business is the coolest thing since sliced bread. Doesn't matter at all unless some customers think it is. So make sure that you're listening to your customers and finding out what they find valuable. So then we talk about the detail of kind of turning things that you don't know into things that you think you know, things that you know. It's really just about getting further clarity, validating these assumptions. Customer discovery is how we do that. Um, I use the framework of a book called The Mom Test. If you have not read this book, I strongly recommend that you go buy it. You can go to their website, The Mom Test. It's on Amazon. It's on bookshop.org. It's very easy to find. It's not expensive. It's less than $20, I think. And you can read it in a Sunday afternoon. And if you're feeling really pressed for time, the last chapter is basically the cliff notes of the whole book. So you can get it even quicker. And it really talks tactically about how to do this process well. And really what I'm doing is kind of pulling highlights out of that book and sharing them with you here in a little bit more interactive or presentation style format. But this is the same, this is the source material. So go to the source. And so really, if you look at this, 60% of the book is about having good conversations, which is most of this session. So that was for last year. So finding people, we'll talk about that. This is a little bit of a framing thing. Actually, I'll go back for that 1 second. So this is one thing that we do want to that I do want to kind of focus on briefly. So this would sort of sit between Danny's video and the detailed presentation I'm going to do on questions. We talked about this last time, but essentially it's how to frame that conversation, whether you're talking to somebody in person or you're sending them an email or a LinkedIn message. How do you get them to have that conversation with you? Now, there's another great presentation called The Power of Network by, I believe, is John Hill. He was at Techstars for a very long time. Prior to that, he was at LinkedIn. He kind of built LinkedIn's search features. He does that presentation quite a lot for Techstars classes, but I'm guessing you can find it online. I should have probably looked that up myself, but I didn't. He's also presented it to the Startup Factory. If you are, connected with Hannah Kirkendall, you might be able to get her to share our recording of that with you. I'm not sure. I think she should be able to. Um, but basically, what we're trying to do is get people to have a conversation with us. And there's a couple different ways to do that. One is making sure that you're starting with kind of your affinity networks as much as you can. So there are kind of like three or four different tiers of networks. Obviously, the first are your friends and family. The people that know you, like you, etc. They will usually respond to you. Something like half of those requests that you put out to friends, family, acquaintances will usually come back with, the ability to have a conversation. Now, that may not make that much sense, based on what you're working on. Like, I don't know, probably not a lot of us have a family full of astrophysicists. So if we were building a space startup, that might not be a great affinity network. But your next affinity network is your university. And it's sort of surprising, but people have incredible loyalty and affinity to not just their university, but to people that have gone to the same university. There's a connection, a shared bond. And statistically, it's something like a third of requests that go out to just a university affinity network will be returned positively. You start to go down the rabbit hole of people in other loose associations. It starts to be a quarter of requests, and then on down. But your university network can be a very, very good source of folks to find to have conversations with. And so when you find those folks, you need to tell them what you want. So basically, you want to say, "Hey, I'm a student, I'm a researcher, I'm an entrepreneur." I strongly suggest the hack of, if you're at the university, using "I'm a student" or "I'm a researcher," because the more you can divorce this from a sales conversation or a salesy sounding ask, the more likely you are to get a conversation. So you might say something like, "Hey, I'm a student working on," I'm going to keep using that space metaphor. "Hey, I'm a student working on uh, low cost satellite refueling. And I'm very early. I don't have a product or anything like that. But I'm trying to understand how I might launch these refueling vehicles. I've heard that you really understand rocketry and you're the absolute best person to talk to. Could you meet with me for 30 minutes next week?" So it's a small ask. And there's a psychology to that, right? Humans are social animals. There's research that says one of the things that you can do to endear yourself to people the most is to ask for a small favor. And so if you're asking folks for 30 minutes of their time, you're asking them maybe directly to answer a question. You might just put your primary assumption that you need validated right in your ask. If you don't think that they're going to be able to give you time, or if it's just a very targeted assumption that you need to validate, that can be a great way to get the conversations that you need. Um, and the biggest part is we have to go out and find them. There are no facts inside your building, inside your office, inside your house. You have to go talk to people. So get out of the building. So now we're going to get into kind of the meat of Danny's presentation here. So this is about finding conversations. So I'm going to play this, and hopefully it comes through. Gene, maybe just give me a thumbs up in the chat or something like that if it's working. Otherwise, we'll go from there. So here we go.
Hello, my name is Danny O'Halloran. I'm excited to do a quick tool overview. I know Andrew has kind of done a quick overview of LinkedIn. I wanted to jump in with another example there. And then I'll show two other tools as it relates to finding that person to have a conversation with, and kind of boiling the ocean, if you will, as it relates to all the different people that are on a platform like LinkedIn. And we're going to start off with the kind of example saying, like, let's say I'm a founder building a product in the sustainability space, and I'm looking to connect with engineers who have worked in climate tech, either as potential hires or maybe even collaborators. here's kind of how I would turn a standard LinkedIn search into a high intent search. And so what I'll start with is using the keyword software engineer climate and giving that a search. And the first thing I'm going to do is go up here up top where these pills are and click onto people. So now I've sifted down to any relatable matches, which gives us 8,800 total results. That'd be a lot of people to reach out to or sift through, and so we're going to add a few more layers of filtering. First and foremost, let's start with location. I think starting with the United States, but actually let's be a little more specific and say Iowa. Show results. That's 125 people. I'm going to click this all filters button in the top right here and get a little more granularity and add just a few more areas here in the Midwest. So let's add Minnesota as one other option and show results. All right, so we've got 394 people. And now let's add a couple more layers of filtering just to make sure that we're talking to or looking at the most relevant pool. And one other filter I like to use as well is looking at the industry filter. So if we pop the filters up again and scroll down to industries, click add industry right here. I think it might be relevant to add, for example, environmental services and software development. Oops. And I think maybe even adding something for services for renewable energy. And we'll go ahead and search. All right, so now we've sifted that down to 190 results. One other thing that is an option could be looking at company size, but the last recommendation I can make is to look at first, second, and tertiary connections. This is your best way in to ask for that warm introduction. I think Andrew spoke a little bit to that, but that's the highest success rate, whether you're trying to find a new customer, find a new partner, or find a new job. Looking at that introduction coming by way of a first or second connection makes it a lot easier, so I can even sift down to secondary connections and see now there are 12 results. That is a very actionable list for me to go ahead and sift through in this scenario. So I'm going to conclude there and jump to the next example, which is a tool called Apollo. Apollo.io is sort of a sales platform end-to-end, everything from finding people to talk to, reaching out to those people, tracking, reflecting, and looking at analytics on how those interactions went, etc. But from a free plan perspective, I think their prospecting or high-level prospecting is great. And so I'd recommend going into this people or companies section. We looked at people last time, so we'll go ahead and look at companies. And now if I click this more filters button, what you'll see here is every way that I can sort and sift through their database of tens of millions of companies and hundreds of millions of people. And I can add specific parameters, which will then sift that down to a very specific use case. And as you can see here, there are quite a few different areas where we can be filtering. And so, for example, if I was looking for software companies, so those that might do remote work to help support building the first version of my product, I could start with an industry. So I would start with a keyword of computer software, and see now that we're down to 95,000 companies. So if I want to tie that in just a little bit, what I'll also do here is add a keyword for startup and MVP. All right, so now we're down to 3,000. And let's go ahead and take the account location and bring it into the United States. Now we've got 871. And now I can also then look at different areas such as the size of the company, so number of employees. Maybe I want to make sure they're a mid-sized company, and so I'll grab these 4 filters from 21 to 500. And more keyword here for development. And so we've got a kind of a wider swath here, but what this lets me do is jump into any individual company. So for example, we'll go to talentify.io. And this is a talent acquisition platform, not exactly what I was looking for, but let's say this was the relevant company. So what I can do here is see a quick preview of potential new prospects, people that might be worth reaching out to based on a few small pieces of information Apollo knows about me from onboarding, the size of the company, annual revenue, some of the technologies that they're using on their website, if they've raised money, but then importantly, looking at their employee list, I can get a nice data access to people that are at the company. So let's say I wanted to have a conversation with Eric here. In one click below, I can click onto and open up his LinkedIn, and once I'm in there, I can start a conversation. Same thing with Eric. I can click to access his email, and I'll look through their verified email database and find his work email, so I can start a conversation directly and feel confident in having a conversation. and even access things like work and mobile phone numbers. A lot of this is credit based, so Apollo will give you a certain number of credits to do things like access the email or mobile phone number. But this is a quick overview of being able to take a large list of 90 million, getting it down to 3,000 or so companies, jumping into one and taking a look at some of the people at that company. With the last thing I'll share being you can open filters on this specific company to look at things like specific job titles so you know you're talking to the right person. Tons more to dive in here. This is a 30 to 90 minute session normally on Apollo alone, but
All right. All right, so that was Danny's video, really covering just a couple super quick, high-level ways to find lists of folks to talk to. And I'm going to pause this share here for a second just to like stop because the audio optimization thing is a little weird. So I'm going to pause this for a hot second and then join it, start it back up. All right, so let's do that, and we'll share that. Okay, sure. Cool. So as I said, now let's gotta play it again. Danny's presentation is really just the tip of the iceberg. You can spend a lot of time um, digging through LinkedIn, working with tools like Apollo to build those lists. My strong recommendation there to you is do not let perfect be the enemy of done. You could spend all day trying to get your Apollo Kung Fu perfect, but really, if you kind of get a quick list and get to talking to them quickly, that's going to be more actionable for you than trying to get to be an expert at any one tool. So use LinkedIn, use Apollo, use your professors, use your networks, and build that list of people to talk to as quickly as you can. I think you really want to have 25 to 50 people that you're sort of targeting at any one time for a conversation. And okay, there we go. And there is a question in the chat, which I'll get to in a second. And get those contacts out as fast as possible. So Ashraf has asked, what's the typical success rate for people responding back to us considering we're strangers? Especially if you are direct, like if you are full strangers, it can be relatively low. There's something to say like email marketing open rates are typically sub 10%. Now, that's why we want to use our affinity networks as much as possible. So you want to get so let's say I build a list of 25 engineers. My example was engineers at Microsoft that I did in the last session. I don't want to necessarily reach out to them each directly. What I want to do is find our mutual connection. So I worked with somebody named Javier Lozano in the past. And Javier knows most of those connections at Microsoft. So I would go to Javier and say, hey, Javier, I want to reach out to these 5 people. I would write a forwardable email, which I mentioned in the last session. You can Google forwardable email. There's plenty of articles on how to write a good one. And ask him, would you be open to forwarding this email to these 5 people? And then you're sort of piggybacking on the reputation of Javier, who's directly connected with the people that you want to talk to. So really using those affinity networks, whether it's direct people that you've worked with, or even your university network. So starting with someone and saying, hey, I see that we're both university or Iowa State University grads, trying to understand this particular thing. Would you be willing to have a quick conversation with me? Now, you're still not going to get 100% of those by any means, but as I said earlier, the university networks, just the university connection, has been researched to show up to maybe a 30% kind of response rate. So there is a numbers game to this, and it does take time. But being smart about who you target can help you push those rates up. So yeah, going back in, here, reminder that we are going through the mom test, and I'm going to get into how to structure your questions. Now, this part is, I typically do this a little more interactively, so I would love it if folks would participate. There are questions, but it's not putting anybody on the spot, and we'll go through that. But if not, I can still do the session, but would love some interaction. So, kind of dig in here. So let's talk about questions. And reminder, why is this book called The Mom Test? It's because we need candid, unbiased feedback about our ideas. But, if we ask the wrong people or if we ask our questions the wrong way, we're going to get false positives. So, like, if you ask your mom if she thinks your business idea is great, well, of course she does. She's your mom. She loves you. She wants you to succeed. Like, your mom is going to think whatever you do is amazing. But unfortunately, your mom is not all of your customers or potential customers, and you're gonna, if you go just base your work and your ideas off of what you get from folks like your mom, you're not you're not going to be building the right things. So the mom test is really a couple of principles about questions. So we want to talk about their life instead of our ideas. So if I go in, let's say I'm building a new AI coding tool for those Microsoft engineers. If I go in to say, "Hey, I've got a new AI copilot. Let's talk about my AI copilot," um, what you're going to end up getting is things like speculative choices about, or ideas about what you've built. You're going to have biased the conversation to only be framed around what you've already built. And you're going to potentially miss insights that you might get if you talk to them about your life. So instead, if I were reaching out to a Microsoft engineer and I wanted to talk about, or I had a theory about AI copilots, I might ask them, "Hey, what's your biggest challenge day to day when it comes to writing code?" And they might say, "Oh, just speed of getting code written," or they might say, uh, "Finding reference material," and like that might be actually telling me, "Okay, I think I'm onto something here with this AI copilot." But they might say, "Hey, my biggest problem is actually distractibility. Like, I have way too many people pinging me with notifications and coming by my office and talking to me, and asking me questions." And so then we may find that their pain is really not about, getting code written quickly. It's much more about you know a office or technology environment that tends to distract them, right? And that might lead us down another path to say, "Hey, the AI copilot space is pretty saturated right now, but perhaps we need something that is a mindfulness routine or something that helps them silence notifications or whatever." I'm just picking these things out of thin air. But we might find that their core problem is actually, or their most painful problem is not getting code written quickly, it's distractibility. And we would want to listen to that and understand it, because ultimately, as we said before, the value is what our potential customers think it is, not what we think it is. So again, talk about their life, their experiences instead of your ideas. You also want to ask for specifics in the past instead of generics or opinions in the futures. And what I mean by that is, if I asked, "Hey, what took up most of your time at work last week?" Then you can tell me. You can say, "Hey, last week, pretty typical week, I was in 15 hours of meetings. Man, that was a lot of meetings, and that's a pretty typical week for me." And so I might learn something about their meeting culture or their need to collaborate versus, "Hey, do you think in the future, you would buy an AI copilot?" Well, sure, I'd buy that, but that's just wish casting into the future. They're guessing, right? And so it's an opinion or a speculation. And if you're basing your business on speculations, ultimately those may not pan out, right? You don't That person who said, "Sure, I'd buy it," is different, or is a person here and now than the person who has to open their wallet in the future, right? Now, if we get to that, point past in the future, "Hey, tell me how much you spent on AI coding tools last week." That's a question that you can understand, and that's based on a fact, versus, would you do this in the future? That's a speculation. So you want to operate as much on facts as possible. And then the big thing is talking less and listening more. So in the conversations that you're having to do customer discovery, you want them to be speaking most of the time. The goal here is really not to make this even an interview, but to have it be a conversation that you're guiding, but where they're the ones doing most of the speaking because they are the ones that have the information. You want to get the information from them. This isn't about delivering information to them. You're doing discovery, you're searching. So you want the information that they have. If you're talking more than the person in the customer discovery interview, um, you're wasting your time and theirs. So, and obviously, I'm here talking fully in the presentation, but but uh, if you if you are having those conversations, just really focus on priming the conversation and then letting them talk. So these are kind of the main bullet points of the mom test. I'm going to keep those down in the corner here when we talk about this exercise. So this exercise is really about asking good questions. So what I want to talk about is I've got a question up here, and we're going to talk about whether we think this is a good question or not. So the question is, do you think X is a good idea? So like imagine that I'm um, asking, maybe I'm sitting down with one of those software engineers and I'm asking this question to them. Um, do you think an AI copilot is a good idea? Would that be a good question to ask that software engineer? Anybody have an opinion?
I would say no.
It-
It's very open to, bias. And if you're saying, if you think this is a good idea, like that's already putting it in their head. Oh, they want me to think it's a good idea. So I'm just going to say yes. And it's not going to be an honest answer.
Absolutely. Thanks, Olivia. I appreciate that. Yes, that is a good point. So it is not a great question. You're right. It's a kind of random and probably not an expert opinion. Like in general, even if the person is doing any given job, they're just speculating into the future. And as Olivia said, this person is subconsciously going to try to be nice to you, which means they're going to tell you it's a good idea rather than giving you the truth. And the other part about this is that when you say, and Olivia alluded to this, when you prime the pump with, do you think my idea is good? You're also sort of selling at the same time, which you really don't want to be doing at this point because the worst thing you could do in customer discovery would be to convince that prospect of your point of view. Because now not only have you lost the ability to get information from them, you now have sort of biased yourself or confused yourself because they seem to have agreed with you. So you really, really do not want to sell in these conversations. Selling comes later. So let's talk about another question. Here's another one. How are you dealing with problem now? So how are you dealing with um, gathering code requirements today? Do we think this is a good question or a bad question? Anybody? All right. Gene?
Sure, I'll just throw out there, I think that's a good question because you're getting them to talk.
Absolutely. It is a good question. And they're showing you something they're not telling you. So they're showing you how they deal with this problem today. It also does some interesting things because it's going to tell you a lot about how their workflow is going. It's going to tell, and maybe even things like pricing data, because they may say, "Hey, we pay XYZ for this tool to solve this problem," and it's going to show you that not only are they dealing with it, it's going to show you how much they're dealing with it, right? So they might say, yeah, we deal with that now. We just throw it in an Excel spreadsheet, and that gets updated once a week, and it's fine. That's telling you that hey, they're dealing with the problem, but like maybe they don't care that much about it. Like it's not that painful. But if they say, hey, yeah, we've got a bespoke tool that we built, that we now have to maintain with our in-house engineers that really is costing us a couple of full-time employees day in, day out. They're showing you like that's a real big burning problem for them. So you're going to learn a lot in a question like this. It's telling you the facts of how they are working currently. So good question. All right, let's get into another question here. So, what would you pay for um, a solution to track your data? So let's keep going with maybe the spreadsheet example. So, what would you pay for X? Do we think this is a good question or a bad question?
I would say it's a bad question also.
Agreed. Agreed. Any other thoughts, Olivia? I didn't mean to jump in there.
Oh no, you're fine. This is kind of like it's having a future connotation to it, saying, what would you pay for it, not talking about the past. And also, again, just kind of will show the bias between it would give bias for that as well. Oh, I'd probably pay, a good amount of money for that, even though they probably wouldn't.
Agreed. Agreed. You're right. Like it's asking them to, again, say something hypothetical about the future from a nice person who just wants you to be happy, right? Like if you say, uh, what would you pay for X? Sure, I'd pay $100 for that. Seems like you're doing great. Good job. Like people want you to be happy, generally speaking. And there's another one that's a little bit more insidious here, which is it feels more factual because it has a number. This is sort of a weird human thing, but when we attach numbers to something, like math feels more like facts than just words. It's just a weird human trait. But if you're putting a number here, so now you've got that to refer to. That feels concrete, even though it really isn't. You've asked them to speculate in the future, but because they put a number on it, now it feels like a fact, where really it's just a guess. And like these are the types of questions that can really trip you up. Because let's say you're building something and it's non-trivial to build, it takes a while, and you're putting a lot of effort into it, based on the fact that people told you they would pay $500 a month for it. So now you've spent your time, you've blood, sweat, and tears into building this thing, and then you go out to sell it, and nobody's buying. You know, you've 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 based all that work on what you thought was a fact because it had a number, but instead it was just speculation. So really, really, really avoid this question. What would you pay for? Is a really challenging question. If you want to get to um, kind of numbers like this, or potential numbers, the question that we talked about before, this question is actually a much better way to get to that question. Finding out what they're spending in time, effort, money to solve the problem that you're interested in now is a much bigger indication of what they'll actually pay in the future, the value that they're currently ascribing to this problem. And can you deliver that value more efficiently? So, this question is a much better way to kind of pull and tease out pricing data than it is to just ask for it. It sounds counterintuitive, like just ask for what you want, but um, the doing it in this way, what would you pay for it, speculating into the future, induces them to give you a kind of a false positive. All right. So this is another interactive part of it. This may or may not um, be work out here. So if there's anybody in the audience that's currently working on a business now, I said it's a one liner. That's a tool that we use in the Startup Factory. You may not have a one liner, but just a quick overview of the business that you're working on, and uh, if you tell us that, then let's figure out an assumption you need to validate and come up with a good question. So, is there anybody that's working on anything right now that has an assumption they'd like to kind of talk about validating? One generated question. Okay, I'll do an example from the business that I built, Workhound. So Workhound does employee engagement and feedback for workers that don't sit at a desk. Think truck drivers, manufacturing workers, warehouse workers, that sort of thing. Um, and we knew that from industry data and from having customer discovery questions that the average trucking company turns over 95% of their workforce every year. And so we needed to validate a few assumptions, or we believe that to be a big problem, and we needed to validate a few assumptions. One was that we needed to validate that truck drivers would even talk to us. That one we did by just going and standing in a truck stop and talking to truck drivers as they came through the door. But we also needed to validate how big this pain was for trucking companies. So let's think about how we might come up with a question to understand how big this pain is for those trucking companies. So again, we know that 95% annual turnover is kind of the industry norm. We need to find out, do companies really view that to be a problem? So one of the ways that we did that was to try and understand what they are spending by proxy on this problem. So in trucking, a proxy for poor retention is higher recruiting. They've got to recruit more to keep their trucks full. So we went and said, okay, can you tell us what it costs to recruit, hire, and train a single driver? And most customers, they knew that, or potential customers, they knew that, and they would say it's between $5,000 and $8,000. Okay, great, great. And so now we know that's what they're spending currently. We haven't now we have a fact, and we have a number with that fact, so that feels pretty concrete. Now we went and asked them, okay, so would you agree that if you have to recruit 100 drivers, that's going to cost you 5,000 times 100, so $500,000. And a 100 driver trucking company is a relatively small trucking company. So yeah, so what we found was even for a relatively small trucking company, they're spending $500,000 a year on recruiting, hiring, training. And when we said, okay, great, if you now this is where it starts to get a little bit speculatively, but are you focusing on retention? Well, no, we really don't have a retention department. And so we started getting into, all right, we know they have a big pain. We know that they are solving it by throwing money at the problem, but they don't have a focus on sort of plugging the leaky bucket. So then we started digging in further. So validating that assumption that they were spending significant amounts of money on uh, on this problem, on their poor retention, by understanding that they were solving that problem um, as a recruiter, then with recruiters, uh, they they were telling us how big that problem was for them. So that's kind of how you're going to navigate this understanding of how big the pain is. So I think Ashraf is going to share his idea in the chat. He can't speak, but I think he'll share in the chat. So I'll read that and then we'll kind of go through this exercise. So let's see. Here we go. He's working on an auto grader for paper-based MCQs for school without OMR. I'm guessing this is the kind of like test sheets. Found from a client that kids struggle with OMR bubbles and it takes a lot of time. So tool is just detect circled responses using OCR and computer vision. Want to see if there's a need for this elsewhere where people are willing to pay. I do know lots of teachers internationally that don't like manual grading. Okay, great. So let's see what we can think through here. We need to understand how big the grading problem is for schools, most likely, because I'm guessing the teachers aren't paying for their own individual test. Well, my dad was a teacher, and you have to pay for a lot more out of your pocket than you should. But generally speaking, schools are probably going to be doing the test supplies. Um, so one way we might validate the size of the problem would be to say, okay, um, school district X, what do you spend on these bubble sheets per year? I'm guessing it's like kind of a silly large number. Like it's, if you think back to your school days, how many of those bubble sheet tests did you take, and how many of them, you know, do extrapolate that out to a whole school district? So that might be a great way to understand the size of the problem for them. Like how much are they spending on these bubble uh, grading sheets per year? That might be one way. Another way might be to say, okay, for teachers that aren't, let's say we've validated that at the school level, it's a pretty big number. Now we want to understand at the teacher level, okay, is that, do you have everything you need um, if the school has spent money on those bubble sheets? Well, we might find, as Ashraf has, that no, that's not everything they need. There are teachers that either don't feel that that's serving their students well with the bubble sheets, the bubble grader sheets, or for whatever reason they don't have access. So they're now manually grading papers. You might talk to that teacher and say, "Hey, okay, if you're not using bubble sheets, how long does it take you to grade an average test?" And so you might see, let's say they say it's 4 hours. Um, for a class of, I don't know, 30 students. So now we know for 30 students, an individual teacher is spending 4 hours doing that manual grading. So then we might say, okay, well, does doing that manual grading, spending that 4 hours, prevent you from doing anything else? And we might find that I'm just kind of doing speculation here, but we might find, oh yeah, it prevents me from updating lesson plans. Oh wow. Like, okay, now we know that because you have to manually grade your tests, you're not able to update your lesson plans. And does that lead to, worse educational outcomes, things like that? So we kind of want to walk through and sort of ask. It's kind of funny. You can sort of go back to your like inner 5-year-old and just keep asking why until it becomes a little annoying, and you'll get a lot of good data. Does that make sense as we describe it, Ashraf? Awesome, awesome. All right, so let's kind of move forward here. So then let's assume we've built good questions, like, and remember, you're going into this as a um, you want to try and keep a casual conversation. So you're probably just trying to say, hey, I have 2 or 3 assumptions that I want to validate in this conversation, and that's where you're going to prime the conversation. But mostly let your kind of prospect or potential customer drive the pace and the direction of the conversation. When having these conversations, it's very helpful if you can have 2 people from your team, especially if it's an in-person conversation, because it's very difficult to kind of participate fully in the conversation and take notes simultaneously. So the idea being that one of your team members should kind of have the primary conversational role, and one of your team members should primarily be note taking or and capturing the insights of the conversation. Now, if you don't have that luxury, or if you're meeting virtually, there are a couple of other ways to do this, which are, note takers, right? Like obviously this call is being recorded. There's an AI note taker. There are plenty of options for that, whether they're, there's tools coming out the woodwork for that. Otter, Fireflies, Fathom, I think Loom does it now. You can find a note taker for really any preferred communication platform. So if you're working with a Zoom or a Google Meet, easy to do. In person, you can do Fireflies. I know has a mobile app that you can use for in-person meetings, or you could just record a voice memo on your phone. Obviously, you should ask the person that you're working with if they're comfortable with you recording. But Doing that means that you can participate fully in the conversation, and then you still have the detail preserved for your insight and your analysis later. Um, Now, that being said, having two people still helps because you can keep each other out of pitch mode. If one of you starts to say, "Hey, well, we're working on," the other one can be like, "Oh, let's pause on what we're working on. We can talk about that later. Let's dig in further." You want to keep each other kind of away from that pitch mode, away from biases. Um, and you're not going to get it perfect, but having two people there, it kind of helps you be the guardrails for each other. Um, and then lastly, you want to end with an ask. And you're going to do this for two reasons. One is because you can actually get something of value, potentially. But two is them being willing to give you something of value sort of gives you an indication of how interested, how relevant, how engaged they are with your kind of problem area and how much they care, right? So let's say um, a good thing to end with, a good ask to end on is to say, hey, whether you may have this beforehand or not, like I noticed you're connected to XYZ person. I would love to have a conversation like this with them. Would you be willing to introduce me? So you might know their connections from like looking at LinkedIn or whatever. Or if you don't have that, you might say, hey, similarly, uh, do you know anyone else you feel I should talk to about this sort of thing? And if they are willing to make an intro, that means they're interested enough to risk their reputation a little bit, right? Like they're giving you a little bit of their trust by proxy. So they're willing to say, hey, I have trust with this person. I'm willing to extend that trust to you because I believe enough in what you're doing or asking about that it's valuable. If you if they either decline to make that intro or they sort of say, I can't think of anybody, um, it may be an indication that they are less engaged with kind of what you're working on. And that gives you a piece of data as well. So ending with an ask always lets you kind of evaluate like how much the person you were speaking with valued the conversation. And just remember, this is not about selling. We are not selling yet. We're learning. So keep each other out of that pitch mode. Do not sell your idea when doing these customer discovery calls. So, and then once you've done the meeting, make sure that you are reviewing and preserving these notes. It doesn't do it any good to have a bunch of conversations and then not analyze them and learn from them. That analysis, that exercise of going through the notes and going through the conversation should let you update your beliefs and plans. If you remember all the way back to that set of columns of, what do we know? What do we think we know? What do we need to know? We should be able to update, ideally, pull some things, from the, what don't we know column into the what do we think we know column now. And ideally, maybe some things from the what do we think we know to what are we pretty sure about column. And that's going to be a long iterative process over the course of customer discovery. We're going to keep moving things through those columns, and then we're going to decide on the next set of things we need to learn. Now, if we still feel that we need more information about the ones, the hypotheses that we're currently trying to validate, we may keep those as our kind of main goals for customer discovery and just go out and have more conversations. If we feel that we've moved some things into that fact column, into the what do we know column, we're now going to update and say, okay, what are the other two or three things that we really feel that we need to learn kind of from the what do we think we know or what do we need to know type columns. So just to recap here, this is kind of the whole shebang. We're going to decide the top three things we need to learn. We're going to decide who we need to talk to in order to learn them. We're going to build a contact list to do it, ideally 25 plus. We're going to connect. We're going to use our warm intros. We're going to use our university network. And we're going to have those casual conversations wherever possible. We're going to frame that conversation if necessary. We're going to have that conversation. We're going to debrief and learn from it, and then rinse and repeat. We're going to do it over and over till we really we take all of our assumptions and build that into a corpus of facts. Now, there's a little asterisk down here. Once we've identified the problem, we've really built through customer discovery, then we might get into an MVP, which is a minimum viable product, and talking about how we're actually working on solving that problem. And we can kind of go through this same process, but we don't want to introduce that too early because we can start to bias the conversation. So yeah, rinse and repeat. Now this is there's some other content that we might have here, but I do think this is actually where I was hoping to kind of end. That was like sort of my appendix content for the day. It looks like we're right about time. And I think we can kind of maybe give the floor back to Gene, if that's all right.
Great. Andrew, that was just great information that you shared. I think everybody's real appreciative of it. So thank you very much. Yeah, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. I did send you guys the Zoom link, so you should have my email address, and I can forward those on to Andrew. And if he has time, he could maybe take a look at them and can get back to you about it. But thank you all for joining us today for this insightful session. And a huge thank you to Andrew for sharing your expertise level, and also to Danny for sharing his video insights on connecting with the right people to be asking those questions of. So as a reminder, we've recorded this session, and you'll receive a follow-up email with the link tomorrow. We hope you'll join us next week for a third session of the Start Something series, where we'll be introduced to the NSF I-Core. And in week 4, we'll be giving insight into crafting and analyzing effective surveys. So Andrew and Danny, again, thank you very much. Appreciate you giving up your lunch hour to present this useful information.
Yeah, and I want to specifically thank Olivia and Ashraf for participating. It works so much better when we have an interactive session. So thank you very much for kind of putting yourself out there. So really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks.